Having formally opened the 14th Eurasian Media Forum, it's time to get down to business. Now, one key feature of this gathering is that you get to ask questions and shape the discussion, so make the most of the remarkable guests that we have here. Do use your questions and comments to help fuel the discussion as we have a very candid and open session here at the forum. Last year at Davos, there were some unusual and interesting quotes, and I can't help but quote a couple of them. One of them is where a panelist said, "Every country needs a minister of the future," while the COO of Facebook, Sheryl Sandberg, said, "Men still run the world. I'm not sure it's going so well." Our first panel session takes a look at changes in world order, building bridges or walls. For that, I want to welcome someone who you know very well from your TV screens as an international TV host and journalist. Please, a warm welcome for Nick Gowing.
Good morning, everybody. I'm standing here because I want to pick up what Riz has just said about this being a conversation. And because it's a long distance between you and the panel, I thought I would make sure that I could activate the connection between what you're thinking and what you would like to hear from them. But let me, first of all, invite up the panel. Before I give some opening remarks, because we are lucky to have four people who are deeply connected with many of the critical areas and issues which all of us are concerned about. This time last year, when we were gathered like this, how much of what has happened in the last year were you even thinking about? What about the unthinkables which are out there? We are here on the 23rd of June, exactly a year since Britain decided to vote to leave the European Union. That wasn't on the agenda of the Prime Minister, David Cameron, at the time, who decided to call that referendum vote. Look at the enormity of the implications of that, and it's happening in Brussels at this moment. That's just one example of unthinkables. And I'm giving you notice here that right from the beginning, I would like to hear from you as well as the panelists. But let me, first of all, invite the panel up. First, José Manuel Barroso, who for 10 years was the president of the European Commission. He's now doing multiple other things around the world, but he's here to bring us very much the European perspective, having been also Prime Minister of Portugal as well. So, José Manuel Barroso, welcome. Secondly, let me invite up Governor Bill Richardson, who's just literally arrived a couple of hours ago, I think via Istanbul, to get here from the United States. Bill, join us on the panel. For 2 terms, he was governor of New Mexico. He was also the ambassador to the United Nations for President Bill Clinton, as well as being the Secretary for Energy as well. He's now deeply involved in global engagement based in New Mexico. Bill Richardson, welcome. Let me now invite up Abdullah Gül. Welcome, just arrived from Ankara. Welcome the former president of Turkey, who served between 2007 and 2014 as the president, and also before that was prime minister and foreign minister. Welcome. And finally, Gilad Shur from Israel. Welcome, a lawyer, government advisor, and peace negotiator for Israel, running his own firm at the moment, senior partner, but was a chief negotiator for Prime Ministers Rabin and Barak. Welcome. And is very much involved in reconciliation. Now, let me again tell you that I'd like to come to many of you right at the beginning, because we have 4 experts up here, but there may be other things which are on your mind, which I would like to hear in the next hour and a half. It's a good chunky session, this, which gives you the opportunity to input into the kind of things that are on their minds. I've asked each of them for 4 minutes only to highlight some of the things where they see the trends very markedly changing in this world of disruption that we've been going through, all of us are going through, where the rules-based system is being challenged, where so much of the conformity which has got people to the top is actually being challenged in so many areas. Remember, this time last year, Donald Trump was one of many candidates for the Republican Party. No one gave him a strong chance of becoming even the candidate, let alone the president. And look at what else is happening. What is happening around the world, where they're looking now at President Trump, who has said that he wants to deconstruct the administrative state, where something like 450 of the nominations which should be going through the Senate, there's no name in the frame for government at the moment. And there are many around the world who are beginning to look at what is happening in the United States as something which they could engage in as leaders around the world. So it's that level of disruption that we need to address as we look at the walls and the bridges that are being built or not built. You might have also seen that President Trump has got a new idea for the wall in Mexico. And Bill, you might want to talk about this. Make it into a massive solar wall, which then generates power as well. And it's not just in geopolitics. Think of what has been happening in the corporate sector as well, with VW, with YouTube and Facebook, and the way they've been challenged on some of the videos they've been posting and the impact that's had on revenues. Think of what's happened with Wells Fargo, trying to create fake accounts. Look at what happened to the president and chief executive. Look at what's happened to Pepsi. Look at what happened to United Airlines when one incident became an existential threat to a major airline in the United States and ended up with the chief executive being challenged on Capitol Hill and being told, if you don't fix your airline, we'll fix it for you, from the Transportation Committee. And then the disaster of British Airways, brought about by just simply an IT error or someone pulling the plug at the wrong time. So these are massive challenges and existential threats, not just in geopolitics, but also in the corporate sector as well. The walls and the bridges are moving significantly. So let me ask each of you, if I may, to summarize your view of where things are, the challenges which need to underpin some of the more granular examples that we want to look at over the next hour and 20 minutes. Jose Manuel Barroso, your 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Nick. Let me start with Europe. I think Europe is going better. For many years, in many international meetings, I had always to try to justify that the euro was not going to crumble, that Brexit was not going to happen, that we could keep Greece. And there was a lot of skepticism. But in fact, I think it is fair to say that the European Union and the euro area have shown resilience higher than what is commonly acknowledged. There are problems remain, accidents may happen, but today all the countries of the European Union are growing, and I believe there are now conditions for a stronger European Union. Of course, there was a major development that has to be considered a setback. It was Brexit. But it's true that British position in the European Union was always somehow exceptional. Not a member of the euro, not a member of Schengen, not subscribing to some chapters in terms of security and internal affairs. So I think now we should deal with this matter in a constructive way, mitigating the negative effects and see what opportunities can come after Britain leaves the European Union. We have very important developments in the United States of America with a new president that gave first signals that were, to be frank, worrying. Protectionist, and also somehow isolationist or even nationalistic. And this has created, and is still creating, some doubts, including among its most important partners and allies in Europe, for instance, concerning the future of NATO and the future of a global trade order. I think it's too soon to say what's going to be the result of this new approach of the United States president. I hope that at the end we will be able to engage with the president of the United States of America that remains the most influential country in the world, so that we can avoid what I think will be very negative. It will be a kind of getting out, United States getting out of the global efforts for global governance. For instance, what happened with the withdrawal of the Paris Agreement, that of course we deeply deplore. We have of course China appearing stable, China that is going to have the very important Congress of the Communist Party by the end of this year, and you'd like to see what developments are concerning China. I think it's critically important that China assumes its role in a cooperative manner for a common approach to global governance. We also have the developments in Russia. Unfortunately, the crisis created by the invasion of Ukraine by Russia has provoked sanctions by the United States, by Europe, and I think we cannot benefit from all the potential of the relationship of Europe with Russia before this issue is somehow solved or in a process of constructive solution. So these are the trends I see immediately. I think most of these trends come from a more general trend that is against globalization. So globalization is happening today, and it's done by science, by technology, by information, communication. The reality is that there is not one country that is controlling globalization. Some time ago, some people were making a kind of equation, globalization as a form of Americanization of the world. This is simply not true, as we have seen, by the way, in the vote for the President of the United States. The President of the United States was elected somehow with a discourse against globalization. At the same time, it is from the United States that we receive Amazon, Facebook, Google, and others that are biggest winners of globalization. So this shows how complex the process is, but the reality is that there is a sentiment in some of our countries regarding globalization that makes people close intuitively, instinctively. When there are these very strong winds of globalization, people tend to close themselves, to try to retreat, and then we see isolationism, protectionism, sometimes nativism, sometimes even xenophobia. And I believe it's a problem and a mistake. I think if you want to succeed, if you want our kids, our boys and girls to succeed in the 21st world, I think we have to invite them to be open, to embrace the great opportunities of globalization. And this is, I think, the message we should try to give. Of course, mitigating negative effects that we know there are, from financial instability to international terrorism to other issues that are global by nature. But precisely because they are global by nature, they require a more cooperative global approach. And that's the approach with which we should deal. 2 points that for me, and I'm concluding, are the ones we should watch very carefully in the near future. 2 points with which I'm extremely concerned. North Korea. I'm extremely concerned what can happen in North Korea. I don't know how can the United States not react if they assume that there will be capacity to attain California, to attain part of the United States from North Korea with nuclear capabilities. So it's a very, very urgent issue. And also the developments in the Middle East that we have been living for many years with them. And I think, once again, that the situation probably will get worse before it can get better.
Mr. Barroso, we'll drill down into some of those, but thank you very much indeed. Bill Richardson, let me ask you from your view from the United States, coming from New Mexico.
Well, I think the world is now tripolar. There are three major powers. One, I would say the democracies. There I would have the United States, European Union, 28 nations. The second would be the near democracies with certain authoritarian streaks, and I say this without criticism. I would put Russia and China in that category. And then the third, and Nick, you wanted me to talk about trends, the third tripolar entity in the world is the non-state actors, terrorist groups, multinational corporations, criminal syndicates, and a lot of the new entrepreneurial that President Barroso mentioned, the Googles, the high-level entities that right now are involved in globalization. So what happened in the United States? In the United States, a president was elected that basically has overturned American foreign policy. There was a very strong populist streak, a nativist streak. You mentioned the wall that President Trump talked about between the United States and Mexico that's caused enormous discord in not just Mexico and the US, but all of Latin America. He's proposed a travel ban against 7 countries, basically a Muslim travel ban that has not been approved by the courts or the Congress, but it's out there. And a very strong populist streak, talking about NATO perhaps becoming obsolete, although that has changed. A stronger relationship with Russia, which has caused a lot of concern and investigations in the United States. But the issue then becomes, is this populism, this nativism, a worldwide phenomenon? President Barroso mentioned Brexit. I think the rise in other European countries of this very strong nationalism, although tempered very successfully by what happened, I believe, in the election in France. A 2-to-1 victory against basically that populism, that protectionism that was eschewed also. I would add that in the United States, the president campaigned against trade agreements, the trade TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, mainly affecting Asia. Right now, renegotiating the NAFTA with Mexico and Canada. So I think these trends that you talked about involve very strong, at least in the United States, what does America first mean? I think you are seeing, however, because of the Congress, because of public opinion, a shift where the president is moving, hopefully, and I will temper. I want to warn everybody, you're talking to a very strong Democrat. I was not a supporter of the president, but he is my president, and I want him to succeed. But I am concerned about some of these reversals that we've had in the international community. With Russia and China, I think what you're seeing is potentials of not just tensions between the power centers of Europe and the United States and Russia and China, but areas of cooperation. North Korea, the potential of cooperating with China and the United States to deal with the issue. With Russia in Syria, I think an American-Russian relationship is critical in Syria to resolve the problem. That has not happened yet, but nonetheless it's existing. On economic issues, the concern in the international community, not just with what's happening in Brexit, but also possibly with Italy, the Greek debt crisis. One of the things that I think has happened is the world has brought us closer together. Technology has, immigration has, all kinds of interconnections, travel, communications. This did not exist after World War II. Today it exists dramatically with social media responsible for toppling governments, as happened in the April Spring. So I will conclude with this. I think the answer here is, do you build walls or you build bridges? I think you build bridges, but at the same time recognize that there are costs to globalization, but I think the benefits far outweigh the costs when it comes to globalization.
Thank you, Governor Richardson. Let me remind you, I'm going to come to you quite shortly after we've heard the other two speakers to hear anything else you want to put on the agenda. There are 3 microphones out there, so give some thought. I'm not asking for speeches, just a minute or so of ideas which we can then put immediately to the panel. Mr. President, Abdullah Gul, welcome. your ideas and your thoughts, please, and particularly if you can build, I think, all of you on this issue of leadership and the capacity to handle the new expectations of citizens and consumers, which is underpinning what Governor Richardson has just said about the power to remove governments very quickly.
Thank you very much. First of all, we have to recognize the world we are living in. It is the globalization, of course. The high-tech technology, information technology removed all the barriers and made the world almost united. Now, this means that the people are monitoring everything in everywhere. And also the politicians and the leaders are aware of. Now, it is very much unfortunate that the new generation of governments and the political leaders, they are opting for opportunism and populism instead of common sense based on values. Now, the people are also questioning the inequality at global level, regional level, and national level. And they raise their voices, of course. When the leaders opts for rhetoric and populism, they give the messages to their own people just to get their support. They ignore the responsibility towards the world, towards their neighbors, and just exploit the feelings of the people instead of having broad views. This is, of course, having far-reaching consequences. So therefore, troubles are starting inside, and later there's a danger that between the states and nations, the new crisis might appear. So therefore, I wish that the world leaders, they make more references on the values such as the democracy, human rights, supremacy of laws. We don't hear any more about this, and therefore the people feel they are depressed, and they feel that they are left behind and their problems are not being addressed. So therefore, the tendencies in the political landscape in many countries are becoming really very serious and dangerous, because we know that what's correct and what's not correct. But we know that because of the populism, because of the just exploiting the feelings of the people, sometimes non-correct policies are being implemented and they are preferred. In the long run, this is really danger for the peace, and collective sense are also disappearing. So I see in the future that we might face more problems, and the world is not ready to challenge, to tackle and to handle these problems.
Thank you very much indeed, Abdul Gul. Let me re-emphasize that point. People depressed about being left behind and the rise of populism, the very serious implications, and what is correct in this, and your alert that something bigger may be coming down the track in terms of stability. Use the word peace. I think, Gilad Shah, you want to pick up on some of these points in your own opening 4 minutes before I go to the delegates.
Thank you, Nick. I will recap a little bit on my fellow panelists' comments and the crises and developments that were shown in the clip, the opening clip. But I would like to zoom out from my own country, Israel, and my area, the Middle East, and extract the principal trends that I identified. First, I would say, is the growing trends of geopolitics of identity that is due to a huge number of refugees and displaced, the largest ever, over 65 million worldwide, most of them in developing countries, constituencies that are driven by xenophobia and incitement, extreme nationalism, and neo-fascism in a democratic disguise, of course terror and violence that spreads all over and is disseminated everywhere right now. And all this causes a lack of solidarity and a fragmentation of the old world order. We might even experience the reignition of the Cold War. That's the first trend. Second one, and this refers to one of your very acute questions, Nick, is the leadership deficiency and incompetence. I think that we live in a transition stage to a leadership that comprises leaders that are neither willing nor capable of strategizing and plan for the future generations. We see rhetorics, we see populism, and even the media coverage often lets corruption coverage put the incompetence on the side and prefer the coverage of that kind of corrupt leadership. We see, of course, post-truth and alternative facts that feed the crowds and lets the leaders be elected. We see leaders that are indifferent to the collapse of the state institutions and the rule of law. And we see a growing trend of asymmetry between those who care and those who just do not care about the future. The third trend that I would like to generalize here relates to the non-state actors already mentioned here, but to state non-state actors as game changers in the security area, in the economy area, in the social order area, almost in all the fields that we will deal with during this conference. There's non-state actors that are involved with, of course, with terrorism, first and foremost, with weapons of mass destruction, new rules of action that are aimed at destroying democracies, and they do play state-like roles within the international arena, if we want it or not, if we accept that or not. All this exacerbates and perpetrates the violent conflicts already in place. And so the intertwined trends, the three intertwined trends that I mentioned are, I think that they could be characterized by short-term, short sight, overriding the long-term considerations, and the lack of a world global regulation for the cyberspace, the space warfare, the drones, climate change, the food, the energy. There's no determined effort currently or orchestrated track to resolve the conflicts that we face.
Thank you very much, Gilead. So what we've got here, apart from some specific areas like North Korea and issues like Russia and China, some overarching trends which can help build bridges, but also build walls, particularly this populism, this consumerism, the citizens as well. What we've just heard as well from Gilead Shah about short-term, short-sight, overriding long-term consideration. So let me just leave that on the table for the moment. Does anyone want to come in? We've got 3 microphones quickly. Anything else you want to put on the agenda? I want you to keep your remarks short, please, and a microphone here, please. And anyone else? Right, please, and introduce yourself.
Thank you. My name is Dr. Shahid Qureshi. I'm editor of London Post. I acknowledge the list of the gentlemen from Israel, but you haven't mentioned one of the non-state actors are the corrupt banking system, which is leading towards the terrorist financing, and that is also including those tax-free safe havens, which are also playing major role in war profiteering and terrorist finance. I would like panel to think about it and how we can handle those illegal and unethical banking systems in 2017.
All right, that's, of course, you could say that citizens and consumers are pushing back because they see that, please. Who else? You go next.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for presentation. A lot of you were very looking at things very positively, but nobody is really talking about the situation, the most dangerous situation that we have seen that is happening in the Middle East right now. With Saudi Arabia, with Qatar, of course, Turkey has taken a positive step moving to Qatar. However, if this continues and the war starts in that region, that is very possible. 12 million barrels of oil of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Abu Dhabi will disappear from the market. That means, of course, American oil companies will be very happy and dancing. Russia will be very happy because the price of oil, as Zakiya Ramani 3 years.
I'll put that point to them. I think we've got the gist of what you've put on the agenda. So let me go to the panel in a moment.
Yeah, it's very dangerous. We have to talk about it. We should not hide it.
All right, we're going to talk about it in a moment. Please, the microphone there, and who wants it here, please?
Uzbekistan Международный пресс.
Uzbekistan International Press Club, Dr. Kudret Khajayev. I also have a question to the speakers in the panel. We here in the East know how people live in the West. We watch movies, we watch news, we know their lifestyles, we know how they make love, what they eat, so on and so forth. But today, the West knows very little about the East, about our religion of Islam, due to a crowd of terrorists who just the day before yesterday blew up a mosque. You can't call them Muslims. You know very little of us, of Muslims. You don't even know what a day is made of when Muslims pray 5 times a day, how it's done. And normally, they're very kind, good people who bring peace. What do you say? Maybe we should change the attitudes in the West so that they learn more about us, so that maybe should global mass media pay attention to the East. Maybe then we'll avoid Huntington-style misunderstanding between the West and the East, and maybe attitudes will change as a result of such learning. I would like to especially learn from President Abdullah Gül, because he is in between the two worlds, and Dr. Barroso, who worked in Uzbekistan has its ancient cities, Samarkand and Bukhara, that are of the same age as Rome. And thank you very much, Dergan Rutan, that you for many, many years have been a bridge. It's the first time for me here in Kazakhstan. And I'm not just amazed by the architecture, but amazed by the fact that Kazakhstan is a dynamic nation that's not dragging behind Europe and can show many, and can actually be a trend center for the whole Asia. Thank you. My name is Basil Khajasan. I'm a journalist. We live now in a period or in time that is very hard to define who's your enemy, who's your ally, especially with the situation happening around Turkey. And it's no secret to anyone how Turkey, for many years, it's been U.S. ally, but at the same time, in the past few years, as U.S. has been blamed in supporting terrorist organization, and Turkey has been fighting those. I'm talking about the Kurdistan's Working Party, and also and then the situation how Russia supported the operations of Turkey in Syria, the shield of Iraqis. I'd like to learn from Mr. Abdullah Gül.
At this stage, we've only got 55 minutes, and we've got to solve the world in 55 minutes. Certainly before the next session anyway, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Dorel Fron, I am from Romania. And I want to congratulate the speakers for this point of view. And my opinion is that we have to think not only to build bridges between countries, but maybe, my question is, I think it's a moment to build bridges between politicians and people, because this can be the root of populism. Politicians have to build bridges between authorities and peoples, between law enforcement and consumers. This is very important, because otherwise the walls will be built around the people, and the walls will be built by the politicians. So we have to build bridges between politicians and people. This can be a solution. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Anyone else quickly at this stage? I'm not ruling out anyone else in future, but anyone else who wants to speak? Yes, one more. Thank you.
Good day, my name is Daria Bublik, Kazakhstan, Mega Management. I think you touched upon an incredibly cool thing, the populism, and hopefully maybe as a result of this forum we can work out specific recognition how at international and national level we should fight that populism.
Panel, let's pick up on this immediately, because there are trends already picking up some of the points you've made, particularly on populism. But let me go to that critical issue, whether leadership understands the enormity of disruption here, whether you see in the leadership class, and all of you in your own way have been leaders or are leaders, whether the enormity of the kind of things we're talking about, the West understanding the East, the populism, the building of bridges between citizens and the leaders, whether there's something even more fundamental here about whether leaders can handle the enormity of what is happening. José Manuel Barroso, you have been Prime Minister of a country and also head of the Commission. What's your assessment now?
I think that on average, leaders today are not better nor worse than before. There are some people that like to think before we had great leaders, now it's only very mediocre, very unable people. I don't understand why.
Can they handle the enormity of disruption at the moment?
The issue is, and that's the point, today it is much more difficult. I can testify my own experience. I was very young foreign minister in '92 in the European Council, where Helmut Kohl, Margaret Thatcher, François Mitterrand, Felipe González, others were there. Sometimes when we make analysis today about Europe, we say, oh, those were great times. It's not true. At that time, European Union were only 12 countries. Today, we are 28. At that time, it was much easier to be prime minister than it is today. Today, the overload of information, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, the social media, has changed dramatically the exercise of power. By the way, as you said, Nick, not only with political parties, political institutions, but also with companies, corporations, that from one day to the other, they can disappear. Look, Lehman Brothers, one of the biggest financial corporations in the world, disappeared from one day to the other. And reputation matters can destroy huge conglomerates. So we are living in a world where speed has changed dramatically. So of course, we would like all to contribute to leaders that have this conscience, but I really believe that what we should look at is what are the conditions of exercise of power in the 21st century, in the age of globalization, when the man and woman in the street feels that their leaders are not really taking in consideration their concerns, and that sometimes they are even ineffective in dealing with those challenges. So we are living a transitional phase. And transition, by definition, creates anxiety. Anxiety, or Angst, as we can say in German. And it is in times of angst, of anxiety, that we see typically people coming with easy solutions, simplistic, populistic, pretending to bring simple answers for very complex issues. I think the solution is for those who believe that they have a rational and reasonable response to work pedagogically, to have the courage to explain their positions, not to give up. What happened recently in France with Macron is very interesting. It was, most people considered that the European Union was a problem to win elections in France. And now we have the most pro-European president ever in France. And you won without a party, without almost any kind of experience, because he has expressed a commitment. So it's a question of leadership, yes, but I don't say that all leaders today are negative by definition or they are positive by definition.
But they're just overwhelmed.
They are good and bad leaders, as there were always in the history of politics.
But they are overwhelmed at the moment.
Excuse me?
They are overwhelmed.
That's true. Today, the exercise of power is much more difficult because of time reaction. The overload of decisions in a leader, Prime Minister, President of the Republic, President of the European Commission, President of the European Union, is much more pressing today than before.
All right, let's nail this. Bill Richardson and then Abdul Gul. The issue of leadership and the overarching, the overwhelming nature of the pressures, social pressures, populist pressures, citizen pressures, and expectations created by this new capacity to feel you know everything on your iPhone, or your Samsung, I should say as well, or your...
Well, by the way, I think there's one great leader in the world, and it's not a man, it's a woman, it's Angela Merkel, who stood for internationalism, she stood for refugees, for compassion. She had political trouble because of that, but she still emerged, I think, as a leader that hopefully others would emulate. Now, you know,
but could she be surprised in September in the way that many other politicians have been surprised?
She could, but look what happened, President Barroso, look what happened with Macron. I think there's a shift. The world is cyclical. Let me tell you, I was a politician. I ran for many offices and won most, but didn't win every one. I will tell you this. I think the problem with leadership has been that leaders don't recognize that the majority of the people, whether there's globalization, whether there's enormous technological breakthroughs, that most people are middle class or poor, and they are not making enough high wages. Donald Trump was elected. Hillary Clinton was a good candidate, but Donald Trump was elected because he recognized in states like Ohio, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania that had been traditionally Democratic, that people were not making enough money. Families had to pay for college. Wages were low. They weren't increasing despite Wall Street doing well. I think this happened in Europe too. This happened all around the world. Politicians mistook the effects of globalization. I happen to think globalization is inevitable. It's generally good. But I think that gentleman here asked a very good question. One of the non-state actors is, you know, corrupt transnational corporations that hide their taxes, that abuse people, that are not accountable, that are not transparent. I think that is increasing, but at the same time, there are transnational companies that are good. And there's another entity that's a non-state actor that's powerful, and that's international NGOs that are, I think, are doing very good work across the board. So those are my points. I think, once again, I think we have to see the trends that are happening. They're not going to be permanent. I think you're going to see a revolt in the United States in the elections in a year. They're going to be candidates, the Democrats, we may win the House of Representatives. We lost the election because we didn't recognize the need for people to basically have higher wages and a better way,
But let me press you.
way of life.
Let me press you. Do you think the political class can understand and get ahead of the trend as opposed to reacting in a very unsatisfactory way?
Well, yeah, I think because of the lessons learned, because of the elections that have toppled the Brexit vote, the vote in the United States, other countries in Europe, the right-wing candidates emerging, but now I think the trend is shifting. Look, Donald Trump in my country, he has 40% of support, 35 to 40%. You know, that's not very good, but he is the president. His party controls the Congress, but you know, so far his agenda on health care has not passed. His agenda on tax reform has not passed. You know, he's having problems. There's a Russian interference in our election, which I think was wrong. And at the same time, you were seeing the American political system, you know, possibly shifting the other way. The world is cyclical. History is cyclical. Nothing is permanent. And political leaders, on the whole, have not grasped that.
Let me, before Abdullah Gül, we go to Turkey and the Middle East specifically, those questions. Gilead Shur, can I just pick up on this leadership issue? Overwhelmed, the ability to understand the level of disruption, not just in Israel and the Middle East, but from where you see it in your position in university now.
I think that the one word that is missing from leadership currently is accountability. I believe that the great leaders of the 20th century, such as Churchill or de Gaulle and our founding father Ben-Gurion, were not giving up the leadership that is unpopulistic when they thought that this is the direction they should take as leaders.
They didn't face social media though, and the instant
exactly.
backlash.
This is a problem. Because you are challenged as a leader by a judgment that judges your tweet as a leadership means rather than your deeds and your actions as a leader. And I believe that accountability to your own constituency, to your national constituency, to the regional community, and of course to the international community is what we need to ask leaders to be dealing with, and and we need to ask them to show that what they do is more important than what they say or what they challenge us to think they are doing.
All right, well, picking up on two of the questions particularly, walls and bridges have been changing in the Middle East dramatically, particularly with the US President's visit to Saudi Arabia and to Israel as well, and what's happening with Qatar at the moment, and what's happened in your country, not just with the presidential election, but what happened on July the 15th last year. What's your reflection, Abdullah Gül, of the enormity of what is changing, particularly the uncertainty and the new tensions that have now emerged, which perhaps were not predicted even a few months ago, let alone a year or two ago? Microphone.
First of all, if you let me say a few sentences about this populism, then I will come to the Middle East and Turkey. Of course, we have to understand why the people are angry. And the leadership role is, one of the roles of the leadership is to educate and to lead the people into the correct direction. Without understanding the people nowadays see that the organizations, they don't have any more credibility, there is no enough transparency, and also inequality in economic welfare. So the people are getting frustrated, and they are, of course, reacting. So the leaders should address this honestly, not to go and exploit their feelings. What's happening in many countries now, they are exploiting the feelings of the people instead of responding, telling them the correct things and showing the correct policies. Coming to Middle East, unfortunately, the Middle East is fragile. And for a long time, there are many hot issues. years before, there was only one problem there maybe, that was the Palestinian problem, Arab-Israeli problem, and the occupation of the Palestinians after 50 years. The solution is not found. Two-state solution is the only one, but unfortunately there is no any move on that direction. So the occupation is going on. I see that this is the core of the many issues. Many leaders in the region, they exploit this also. So this problem should be solved and should not be ignored. The other things is Iraq war, of course. Now, many mistakes were done. After the war, the state dismantled. Then all the officers in the army, they were put in the street in one night. And then the radicalism was inevitable there. Now the Syrian, when the Syrian front was opened, there was no any exit strategy for those they feed and they push the war there. Without any exit strategy, now this mess was created, and unfortunately, millions of people are being suffered there. Millions of people are refugees. And at the beginning, even in Europe, no one was ready to tackle this. In Europe, they ignored. They thought that they are not coming and knocking their door. But at the end, the people, they came to Turkey, they went to other places, and then they went to the heart of Europe and knocked the door. This is the human rights issue. At the end, you have to open the doors and tackle this. So therefore, the problems are many there. And the Yemen war. So there are at least 4 civil wars in the Muslim countries. Of course, first of all, the leaders of these countries needs to be blamed because they did not initiate the reforms in their country and they did not put their home in order. So this is one of the main reasons for me. The legitimate demands of the people were not met at the beginning. And then when the problem became chronic, now it's heartbreaking. As far as Turkey is concerned, once together with my friend, Barroso, we worked very hard for the negotiation process. Turkey was the candidate for EU. This was very much important because a Muslim country, it was the first time, Muslim country became the candidate, and it was proved that a Muslim country can fulfill the European standards of democracy. So this was the intention, that's how we started, and that's how many people in the world, Muslim, non-Muslim, they were very much enthusiastic about this. But unfortunately, because of some problems from the EU side and some also problems from our side, it's not going very well. I hope that this is temporary. And I hope that, again, this process is reactivated and the Turkish way for the membership is open.
But could I just press you on Turkey? Because if we were talking a year ago, you would have been in a cold state with Russia, that the walls were going up. And then no one this time last year would have predicted what has happened between you and Russia, between Turkey and Russia, where there's a new military agreement, there's a new bilateral relationship. We've now seen what's happened between Saudi Arabia and Qatar. We've seen what's happened in Yemen as well. We've seen dramatic changes in Saudi Arabia, particularly a couple of days ago, with the new crown prince and so on. Is it possible to predict with any certainty, and in Turkey you had the July the 15th coup, is it possible to predict with any certainty the level of stability or instability which now threatens in the Middle East?
Well, for a long time, Turkey was the force for stability in the region, and we were helping very much for the neighboring countries. And the reforms in Turkey became the inspiration for many other countries. We all know this. Unfortunately, the incident with Russia was very much unfortunate. It's good that now it is being mended and now the relations are getting better. In the Middle East, Turkey has historical ties with them. Turkey cannot ignore what's happening there. And also Turkey has very long border with Syria and Iraq. So therefore, we wish to see all these places in stable and economic welfare. Otherwise, if we see the mess over there, at the end, the fire will hurt us all. So therefore, it is the security perception for us, and we follow up. For instance, the Syrian crisis, now more than 3 million Syrians are refugees in Turkey, and we have to handle this without getting enough help from the outside. So therefore, we prefer the stability, definitely. We never wish to see hot issues in the Middle East, and we never wish to see fights over there. When there are fights, then the repercussion on this is on Turkey. So therefore, Turkey is doing its best to stop it.
All right, well, let me...
Saudi Arabia and Qatar, it's a new, as if all these Iraq, Yemen, Syria, the Palestinian issues, these are not enough. Now suddenly, although it's not suddenly, because we know the history of this problem between Saudi Arabia and Qatar, but it became hot, of course. I mean, this is very much set, of course. And during the month of Ramadan, this embargo and this political crisis is not good. But I believe that with dialogue, they have to solve this, because at the end, they are from the same family almost. They are from the same religion, same ethnic background. It is the problem. It's the political problem.
Right. Well, let's just keep focused on the Middle East, and also, if we can, on that particular question about whether the West really understands Muslim nations. José Manuel Barroso, you had to deal with a lot of these nations as Prime Minister and certainly as President of the Commission. But when you look at what's happened, whether in Saudi Arabia, with Iran, what's happened, obviously with the migration crisis, which was warned about, but the European Union was very slow to understand the enormity of what was coming, and the implications of so much which is changing, whether it be the Turkey-Russia relationship, the Turkey-Syria relationship or non-relationship. How easy is it now to read for all those out there about whether more walls are going to be built, or there is a potential to build bridges somewhere, new bridges? Could you start again?
It's true that more has to be done to know each other, to know the West, to know Muslim, Arab civilization, and also the opposite. That's true. Having said that, I would like also to underline a point that more and more I'm convinced of. Very often, when you make the analysis of what went wrong, people tend to think the United States or Europe should have done this or should have done that. And because the United States or Europe did not have done that or this, the situation is negative. I frankly think today that we exaggerate the leverage of outside forces when dealing with deep crises in some of the regions that we are speaking. It's possible from outside to impose war, but it is almost impossible to impose peace if the parties themselves do not want peace. Look at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. For how many decades we are discussing it? How many investments, peace process, photographs in the White House, in Camp David? Where are we now? we are probably in a worse position than we were before. Look at the Middle East, all the investment made, diplomatic or wars, where are we now? The level of polarization in the Middle East is today much higher than before. So frankly, I think what we should do is to ask the partners in that area, that region, to show, first of all, their sincere commitment to peace. Afterwards, the other countries can help, but they are not the decisive factor. The United States or Europe, they will not be able to solve the problems of the Middle East. It is a complete mistake to think that that will happen. It's the people from the Middle East that have to look at their past, what went wrong, and to try to build among themselves a minimum of trust that unfortunately today does not yet exist.
Check one thing with you. 3 years ago, the Saudis decided to unilaterally reduce oil prices by 60%, which shocked and surprised everybody. And oil is now at about $46 a barrel. They wanted to get it back up to $100 a barrel. Do you think that moment on its own, was a serially important moment because it affected the judgments being made in Saudi Arabia, which now are having implications in much of the Middle East?
It was a sovereign decision of Saudi Arabia, one of the biggest producers of oil in the world. I understand why they took that decision. Now, the reality is that it makes sense from my point of view, the countries that are oil or gas producers to work in a much more predictable, long-term way. And what comes to the oil, probably have here around the table people that know much more than me about that. I'm not an expert on the geopolitics of oil or gas, but for me it's quite clear, looking at the general evolution, that the supply of oil, like shale gas, the supply of other hydrocarbons is changing dramatically the landscape. And we will not come back to the situation before. So we have to put in our equation of what's going on in the world a fundamental change on the capacity of the oil producers to control the evolution of the price of oil. I think that's going to happen. We are already feeling it. And partly the current situation of instability, in my view, is related precisely to this. Is related to fundamental changes in terms of offer and supply and demand of oil and gas in the world. And we are seeing this, and we are going to see more of this also with the possible diversification of energy, including renewable sources and others that we are going to witness, and that is going to increase, because that revolution, whether President Trump signs or does not sign the Paris Agreement, is going, because the young people in the world, science and public opinion already decided we have to go against climate change. We have to keep our planet alive. So these issues are long-term, and they are going to change fundamentally the leverage of the resources that until recently were extremely important, but over time they will lose importance.
And we've seen the implications, economic and social, in countries like Venezuela, Nigeria, Ghana, and we are, of course, in a major oil-producing nation here as well, and in Russia. Gilead, you wanted to come in?
I just wanted to comment on the questions about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Look, it's not a question of imposing peace on the parties. It's a question of imposing a process of negotiations that would facilitate making peace even gradually and changing the course or the trend towards the one binational state, which is a disaster for both Israel and the Palestinians, into a gradual process that would comprise regional elements, bilateral elements, and even independent constructive steps towards a two-state reality. And the question here is whether the renewed effort of President Trump in his recent visit to the area, is going to produce something different from what we've seen in the last 2.5 decades.
Could you just tell us what you think the status is? You were one of the negotiators in Camp David and Taba. That's going back a long time.
There is a status quo that works in nobody's favor. The status quo is not manageable, it is not sustainable, and we need to change it. The way to doing it is to revitalize, once again, to revisit the quartet, the US, EU, UN, and Russia in a concrete way to produce a roadmap for peace in the Middle East, normalization of the relationship between Israel and at least the relatively moderate Sunni actors such as Egypt and Jordan and Saudi Arabia and of course the Emirates and the Gulf states, because the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is part of that, and it will be eventually over. It will be resolved, but not in the foreseeable future, not in a kind of a comprehensive permanent status agreement that resolves all the contentious core issues of Jerusalem, the refugees, the statehood, the settlements, boundaries, security, and all of these issues. However, there is no way for the international community to continue just sanctioning and delegitimizing Israel while not doing the minimum effort to orchestrate an effort for a binding, continuous process of negotiations. You know, during the last 2.5 decades, the negotiations on permanent status did not proceed for 25 years. Just maybe 2 or 2.5 years. You mentioned Camp David in Taba, and then the Annapolis process in 2007 and 2008, and then the last round of talks between Israel and the Palestinians under the very last year in the presidency of President Obama. So we now have a relaunching of the process, and President Trump is well positioned to lead a world effort in that direction. He wrote The Art of the Deal in the mid-80s with 11 guidelines or principles. Let's see if he can implement them on us.
So you're suggesting that bits of the bridge are actually being built at the moment?
Yes, but it's a bridge in order to have a divorce process, not to have it's a bridging process for negotiations in order to divorce or to disassociate the ones from the others, Israelis and Palestinians.
Gilad, thank you. Bill Richardson, let me just pick up on that important point about the West still not really understanding the East from the delegate here, and particularly after what has happened in the United States since January the 20th, particularly over security, terrorism in quotation marks, the attempts by the White House to impose things which have been pushed back at every stage. But the message is very clear and particularly unpleasant.
Well, I totally underscore what the gentleman said. The travel ban against 7 countries that has been revised several times has not been approved by the courts. The immigration, the wall with Mexico, and saying that Mexico is going to pay for that wall. This was an electoral strategy that for President Trump worked. Now, you know, on the Middle East issue, let me just say that I'm going to say something positive about President Trump. I haven't done that yet. The positive is that the bombing of Syria for chemical weapons was the right decision. However, I am concerned with what the gentleman said, the quagmire with Qatar, with Yemen, with Saudi Arabia, not emphasizing human rights, saying security over human rights. I think America has more leadership. We stand for something, and I regret that has happened. Let me also mention something about, I wish President Struba-Gil had stayed because I think he was a great leader. And by the way, did you know, Nick, that President Struba-Gil had the largest number of Twitter followers in the world, more than President Obama. Isn't that right, Asdrubal? He wasn't listening. Anyway. And
how many Twitter followers did you have, Mr. Gul? How many Twitter followers did you have? Microphone, please. Microphone. Microphone, please. Microphone. We just wanted to know how many Twitter followers you had.
I have 8.5 million followers.
All right, that's good.
Yes.
You went through an interesting challenge from Mr. Erdogan about the danger of Twitter in your country, but we won't get into that debate. Bill, just pick up on that point. Mike.
What I was going to say about Turkey, and this is why I wish he'd stayed, is, you know, I think Turkey is an ally on the Middle East. However, it's not always been, in my judgment, a true partner. Why? Because I think there's been too much concentration on holding back some of the Kurdish nationalism as opposed to fighting ISIS. And I think that is, what you're seeing in the Middle East is enormously shifting alliances. All of a sudden, you know, my enemy is my best friend. And so I think that has obviously complicated the situation. With Gilead, I agree with him about the situation in the Middle East, the Israeli-Palestinian issue. I think we have to buttress the importance of Israel. It's not just one-sided. I don't think much is going to happen in the negotiations now. I don't think both parties are ready. But at the same time, I think we have to find ways. The most important problem in the Middle East is ISIS. And here's a great opportunity for the United States and Russia, which have been on wrong sides for years lately, to come together and devise a strategy. The second issue is obviously the Syrian issue. How could we find a way, in my judgment, for a transition government there? How can we find Turkey, the major players, the United States, Russia, and other Middle East countries, and the European Union? Europe is essential in a solution there.
Right. Anyone else want to come in at this stage? We've got about 20 minutes to run, no more. Can we get the microphone here? Make your comments as short as possible. I'm trying to cover as much as possible, and I will come to North Korea. I also want to ask about American influence as well around the world, whether it still does have that kind of level of influence. Please.
Thank you. I'm the ambassador of Lebanon to Kazakhstan. And please allow me more than 2 minutes if I will elongate. I promise not to take the floor anymore, okay?
2 minutes.
3 minutes, 4 minutes,
2.
whatever.
I'm in charge.
All right. First, I'd like to cater the issue of the peace negotiations between Palestine and Israel. I know Palestinians are more than ready to finalize this issue, but the Israeli side is blocking the issue. And I wonder how this gentleman from Israel is saying that we are for 4 type of partners, United Nations being one of them, and he very well knows that Israel is not implementing the UN resolutions regarding the Palestinian issue. The other part I'm saying, I want to say that the West has created its own ogre, which is the ISIS, the Al-Qaeda, and now is trying to fight against. Let me ask the question, in fact. The biggest power on earth now, the United States of America, who beat, let's say, the Saddam's force in Iraq, and facing ISIS I remember President Obama was saying that war against ISIS may need up to 4 years. This ISIS, how many thousands of ISIS fighters were there? Saddam's army was about 1 million, and within, you know how many days you beat the army of Saddam, and now we're talking to beat the army, so-called army of Daesh or ISIS. Is this rigorous or not?
Thank you.
But what you had is that You had stakes in Baghdad, you had stakes in Syria, and you want to care of that. And in that case, you wanted to deplete these countries. And so I believe all the gains was for the benefit of Israel. On the third side, I want to say a few words on President Trump's visit to Saudi Arabia. Tell me one contract or deal that the United States made with Saudi Arabia which deals with something humanitarian. Nothing at all. All the deals were based on arms. What I want to conclude with is that, yes, wars are building up. Yes, bridges are building up, but all bridges are to sell arms and weapons to the Arab world and to deplete their old financial resources. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for that last point, particularly here. You got.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Спасибо большое за предоставленную.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. Alisher Azimov, Uzbekistan, journalist. The question, just to follow up the Arab and Israel conflict, it seems to be an internal program, but who is benefiting from this? Who benefits from lots of weapons that shoot people being delivered to this region? Maybe that's the root of the problem that Arabs and the Israelis are trying to solve on their own. Thank you. Hello, correspondent of Radio Azatıq, Madim Makhmametov. My question is to the former President Abdullah Gül. From yesterday, we've been hearing that the Russian side is negotiating with Kazakhstan to bring forces from this country and Kyrgyzstan to also participate in the actions in Syria. References being made to the words of the official representative of President of Turkey, Mr. Kalin. What can you say about this? Is it true? And what is the danger for Kazakhstan if it is?
Out there at the moment, we've got about 10 minutes to run, so we can all do the mathematics and work out it's tough. Let me ask you that specific question first of all, Abdullah Gül. Do you know about this?
Well, first of all, I want to say that Turks are not against the Kurds. Turks and Kurds are almost relatives. So we wish to see them in safe and welfare. But what we are opposing in Syria, that there's a Kurdish group affiliated to PKK, terrorist organization, and they are trying to change the demography of the region there. So we don't want to see this. That's what we are against. Otherwise, of course, I mean, we want to see all the people, the Kurds, Arabs, Turks, happy in their own states. Coming to this question, I think there is a misunderstanding, although I don't know the detail very well. There was a statement from the Speaker of the President yesterday in Turkey that there might be some soldiers from Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan to Idlib. The city is not the Kurdish part. Idlib is the Sunni part, the opposition. They are there, and it's not the Kurdish place. And in order to keep the peace, to strengthen the ceasefire, Turkey, Russia, Iran, they are working very closely. This is a breakthrough. In fact, this was a breakthrough, and this was good, at least to stop the blood there. Maybe the statement was about to just strengthen the ceasefire. So this was not the Kurdish area. It is the Arab region, Idlib, and most of the opposition are there, and the people, they escaped from the regime forces. They are living in the city of Idlib. So this is the information I got also from the statements, but it's not the Kurdish region.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me pick up the question from the Lebanese ambassador and just take it a couple of stages further. He was worried about essentially kinetic weapons and the $110 billion deal that was done by the United States in Saudi Arabia. Let me press you even further about the next year, about building walls and bridges. This is the old kinetic thinking about what war is about. We're now seeing digital capacity. We're now seeing cyber capacity. We know the ability to intercept and get over walls and bridges of those who are determined to play this game now around the world. How much is this now a real challenge, do you think, first to José Manuel Barroso, to stability? The kind of stability which the European Union has always been about, which NATO has been about, but minds have not really adapted enough to the enormity of the non-kinetic threat and the threat to nations, nation states, and stability within nations.
I'm personally very worried.
Microphone.
I think one of the developments we are going to witness, in fact we are witnessing already, is a race to weapons. We are seeing it in the Middle East, we are seeing it in Asia, in East Asia. And of course, when we see these movements, we should be worried, because weapons, very often people prepare them to use them. So that's why I insist on the political agreements before. Today in Europe, it's considered unthinkable, a war between the former enemies, between France and Germany. It's unthinkable. But if you go to Asia, the level of mistrust between China and Japan, or Korea, or the two Koreas, in fact, it's huge. It shows that they have not yet addressed some fundamental issues of confidence and trust. So, at the end, it's a political issue. Of course, while there is no political confidence, what's going to happen? We are going to see more and more investment in defense and weapons material. And that's what's going to happen. And by the way, it's happening today, which is showing a very high degree of volatility in the world. And I think we are going to live with it for the time being, unfortunately. So we may have accidents. If you compare the current situation to the situation of the Cold War, in fact, there have been less conflicts, less casualties. We are going through awful wars like Syria. But all the wars today are minimum compared to the wars we had in the 20th century in Europe. Only one battle of the Second World War has killed more people than all those that were already dying in wars in the 21st century. But the question is today is a different kind of conflict. It's non-state actors, it's much more anomic, erratic, creating this feeling of instability and insecurity that is contaminating all our societies and pushing for more nationalism, more aggressive positions. So we are living a period of transition, and I believe that responsible leadership should be to try to avoid those conflicts to generate. When those conflicts exist, try to contain them, if possible to have a solution for them. But if not possible, because I'm sorry to say, I think we are not going to find in the near future a solution for Palestine, Israel, forget about it, there will be no solution. I think there will be no solution in the foreseeable future for the issues between Sunni and Shia in the Middle East. It will only get worse. So at least let's contain those conflicts and avoid that they spread for a kind of a generalized war.
Gilead, sure, this issue of not just traditional weaponry, but also cyber and digital weaponry, and the ability to destabilize countries. Do you fear that actually we are going to be shocked by some of the things coming down the track and the speed at which they're going to happen?
Yes, I am. I am quite concerned with that, and I'm concerned also with the fact that we don't use only now the regular weaponry that we used to use in the past, but we have much more advanced weaponry that do not need anything more than just someone with a keyboard, you know, to kind of dismantle the institutions and establishments, etc., and states. But I would like to address briefly the comment made by the Lebanese ambassador, which kind of strikes me as you see what's happening in Syria, and you're still criticizing Israel, and you see what's happening in elsewhere in your own country with Hezbollah, which is a proxy of Iran, of course, perpetrating terrorism and violence and hostilities everywhere possible, and you still criticize Israel. While my own experience, is that in whichever juncture that the process between Israelis and Palestinians was at a certain point about to reach or to attain an agreement, the Palestinians just walked away and resorted to terrorism. It's not quite so that you just accumulate all kinds of international resolutions and by that against Israel, and by that you achieve peace. That's not the way to be doing that. You need to see how to disengage Israelis and Palestinians, the ones from the others, in a way that would establish a two-state solution that would be the self-determination of the Palestinian people and the self-determination of the Israeli people as the national nation state of the Jewish people, the single one. Look, we left Gaza 12 years ago, unilaterally, by disengaging from the Palestinians there, and what we got? We got thousands and thousands of mortars and missiles and rockets over our civilian centers as a kind of a thank you note. So I believe that we need to get back into the process, and we need to do a gradual disengagement of Israelis and Palestinians, the ones from the
Thank you.
others.
We've got 5 minutes left only. I want to go back to the opening remarks and what Jose Manuel Barroso put on the agenda about DPRK, North Korea, about the options and the potential inevitability of something very nasty happening. Bill Richardson, what do you think the American options are? New Mexico, I'm not sure if it's in range of an intercontinental missile from Yongbyon, or whether you're that worried about it, but we had a rocket failure. We had a rocket test, an engine test done a couple of days ago, and it's possible that Stuxnet type digital cyber attack stopped two of the missiles and they blew up on the launch pads. But what do you think the options are? Hopefully we'll all meet again in a year's time. But is there an appetite in the United States? Would there be an understanding if this had to be done as a way of preempting something which could be an intercontinental missile which could hit Western United States?
Well, I've always said that North Korea is the land of bad options. All the options are bad. Now, what do we do about North Korea's continued escalation? Only recently there's American outrage at a young American who was detained by the North Koreans, 22 years old, kept in prison for a year, sentenced to 15 years, and just returned to the United States in a coma, and he died 2 days ago. There's a real humanitarian impulse in the United States to take action on North Korea. So what are the options? I think the preemptive military strike is not a good option at all. Why? Because you've got American troops, you've got 25 million people in South Korea and Seoul that are vulnerable. You've got Japan. I think the solution has to be one, additional pressure on North Korea, which may not work. With a father, I've been to North Korea 8 times. With a father, with a grandfather, you could always make a deal. There was bluster, there were missile tests, nuclear tests, but in the end, you could make a deal. With this leader now, Kim Jong-un, you don't know what he wants. He's totally unpredictable, hostile, not interested in dialogue. So I think the sustained effort has to be one. China is the key. China has leverage over North Korea. They provide food, fuel, energy assistance. The issue is, does China want to put serious pressure on North Korea? They may not want to help the United States in that region of the world because we're rivals, geopolitical rivals. They may like the turmoil. President Trump has tried to get China to do more. I think they're doing a little more, but it is obvious it is not enough. The cyber efforts to degrade North Korea's nuclear and other capacity, missile capacity, should continue. I think there are additional sanctions that may work involving Chinese banks, involving going after the North Korean financial leadership through Chinese banks that have not been imposed. But then at the United Nations Security Council, China or Russia can always veto, usually China. So in the end, a lot of bad options, but I think what is going to be needed is a cooperative effort. I saw a report the European Union may be brought in as a mediator. Six-party talks, I think Russia can be a constructive actor, but there are no good solutions right now.
Right, time is short. Gilead Shah, Israel has used preemptive action against nuclear facilities in Syria. Do you believe that that's the right way to do things?
This is according to foreign sources. Was never admitted.
Of course, foreign sources are always good.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk.
Israel is on the sidelines of the Syrian crisis.
I'm talking about the nuclear reactor. I'm talking about the nuclear reactor.
Right, I know. But Israel will do whatever is needed in order to protect itself, in order to secure itself, in order to not be part of anything that does not concern it. And I don't think that we need to say more about that at this point in time.
Abdullah Gul, do you believe in preemptive action against North Korea? Abdullah Gul, do you believe in preemptive action to stop the nuclear threat from North Korea? Microphone. Mike.
I think that first, the political solution needs to be exploited to the end, and the war should be the last resort. So I think that China is crucial here, of course. There should be a real talk with China, and not in front of the people, behind the doors. They should be convinced to help this. I think it is not in their fair also for China to see the North Korea with nuclear weapons, because any non-democratic country might use this weapon of mass destruction irrationally. So therefore, the danger is there, but we have to calculate very well, and before declaring war or before launching missiles, that the political solution is the best.
Jose Manuel Barroso, how are you reading things? We've had the meeting in Washington 3 or 4 days ago between America and very senior general and also a very senior Chinese Foreign Office official. What do you think the options are, and what are you picking up?
I think that the Americans are putting a big pressure on China. I think Chinese understood that it's not a bluff, that's very serious. I personally believe that if there is not a solution found by China, the Americans will go and attack North Korea. Either Trump or any other president, any American president that is convinced that North Korea can attain with ICBMs its territory, they will act before that can happen. So the question is, of course, if those diplomatic and pressure efforts made together by the United States, China, hopefully others, can convince the regime of North Korea to cut this program. If not, the most likely scenario is certainly an intervention of the United States in North Korea.
Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. I hope we've cheered you up this morning, reassured you, given you a feeling that the next few months are full of bridges, not walls, and I'm being slightly sarcastic with myself. It is a rather gloomy series of prospects that we have. Can I thank you all very much indeed for your candor and also the speed at which you got through a large number of issues. So thank you, all of you. Riz, the floor is yours.